Hi everyone, Ian here from the Media Center, and in today's video I'll be showing you how to use the Sony A7S III and covering some of the core settings you should be thinking about when setting up the camera. When capturing for video, set the camera's setting dial to movie mode, so the film strip icon. Once in movie mode, check you're in manual exposure, as you'll want full control of the camera. To check this, power on the camera using the dial and then navigate to the FN function button on the camera body. This will bring up a quick functions menu and you can navigate to the movie function using the D-pad control wheel or the joystick. Enter the command by pressing the center of the D-pad or the center of the joystick. Choose M for manual exposure. Note initially this may be on auto by default. If the camera goes into sleep mode, which it may do to preserve power, press the shutter button and it will awaken. The A7S III has an array of physical quick function buttons, all of which can be customized in the menu setup in the Custom Key Settings tab. And the ones you'll see here are my personal preference, so ensure that you adapt these to suit your own shooting style. To adjust the aperture, use the front roll wheel, and to adjust the shutter, use the back roll wheel. To adjust the ISO, press the right button on the D-pad and roll the wheel to make adjustments, or if your touchscreen is enabled, tapping and dragging on the LCD. Different picture profiles have different native ISOs. The A7S III also has a dual native system, meaning each picture profile has both a low ISO and higher ISO that both retain a cleaner signal to noise ratio. The native ISO for Cinegamma 1 is 50 and 1000. The native ISO for Cinegamma 4 are 100 and 1000. The native ISO for S-Log is 640 and 12800, and the native ISO for S-CineTone is 100 and 2000. To adjust the white balance, press the C1 button, and from here you can select a variety of presets or use the K function, which allows you to dial in the Kelvin range manually, which is what I'd recommend. To focus on a subject, you can use the C3 button to magnify. This will present magnification on both the LCD screen and through the EVF. To gauge your focus with more clarity, you can enable peaking. I've got this set to the left-hand dial on the D-pad, but I've also set it within the quick function menu as well. Within the function window, you can also adjust the peaking's intensity via peaking level. Again, any of these buttons can be changed via the custom menu tab at any time. So if you never use peaking, then set these parameters to something different. Remember, a camera should always be designed around the user's specific needs and preferences. Pressing down on the D-pad will allow you to adjust your audio levels, and pressing up on the D-pad will cycle through a range of display information overlays on the LCD. Some of these will provide lots of information to the users, while others will present a cleaner display window. The C4 button acts as a delete bin when in playback mode, but I also have this configured to the picture profiles during live monitoring. This is where you'll be able to move between Cinegamma, S-Log, and S-CineTone color profiles. The AF on button allows you to toggle between autofocus and manual focus. When autofocus is selected, you can use the touchscreen for touch focus and can also enable eye priority autofocus by pressing the center dial on the D-pad. Autofocus speed settings and tracking priorities can also be adjusted in the menu. The C2 button opens metering mode. This lets you adjust the camera's light metering type. Different light meters are optimal for different situations. Finally, I've set the AEL button to enable slow motion frame rates. To capture in-camera slow motion, turn the top dial from the film strip icon to the S&Q function. Slow motion frame rates can be adjusted from the menu. For the internal menu, I'm only going to cover the core essentials relating to video capture in this video. Press the menu button and navigate to the shooting page, then image quality. In file format, you have varying flavors of XAVC 4K and HD recording formats. XAVC-S provides 280 megabits per second in 4K and 100 megabits per second in HD. This uses long-op compression. XAVC-HS gives 280 megabits per second in 4K, but requires SD cards of V60 or higher. This uses intra-compression instead of long-op. XAVC-SI gives you a huge 600 megabits per second in 4K and 222 in HD. SI requires cards of V90 or higher. SI also uses the H.265 HEVC codec, which can be more processor intensive and can be difficult to edit with on some older computers. Intra compresses the movie frame by frame, while long-op compresses multiple frames. Intra compression has better flexibility when editing, however long-op has better compression efficiency. If your computer can handle intra, then use HS or SI. If it can't handle these variants, then use XAVC-S. In the movie settings, we can adjust the recording frame rate and recording settings. From the record frame rate, you can shoot in 25, 50 or 100 frames per second. The 100 frames per second from this area will also record sound and will need to be slowed down in post-production. For record settings, we recommend shooting in 422 10-bit and using the largest megabits per second available. The megabits per second will vary based on the resolution and frame rate you've set. The S&Q settings will become available when the external mode dial is switched to S&Q. Record frame rate refers to the playback frame rate for which the slow motion video will be viewed at. The frame rate refers to the frame rate you'll be capturing in the camera. You can record up to 200 frames per second in HD and 100 frames per second in 4K. Note, this footage will be slowed down and baked into the file, and your audio will be disabled. So, for example, if your record frame rate is 25 frames per second and the frame rate is 100 frames per second, the image will be slowed down by 4. For slow motion record settings, you can capture up to 140 megabits per second in 4K 422 10-bit. As previously stated, we'd recommend always shooting in this 422 10-bit codec. The APS-C Super 35 shooting mode will only be available when you shoot in 1080p. This crops the sensor from full frame to an APS-C sensor, meaning you can get closer to your subject without moving closer. In the media page, format will delete all information from the media cards, and prioritize record media means you can choose which card is recorded to first. In recording mode, you can capture in either a standard setup, meaning you'll capture to one card at a time, or you can simultaneously record, which means you'll capture onto both cards at the same time. When auto switch media is enabled, the media cards will automatically switch over when the card becomes full. On page 4 shooting menu, ensure your exposure mode and S&Q exposure mode are set to manual. The audio you capture in camera will primarily be used for scratch audio and sync sound. From here, you can turn the internal audio on or off and manually dial in your audio levels. As mentioned earlier, you can also dial in your audio by pressing down on the D-pad if you've customized this button to do so. Audio out timing can remain as live, and I'd recommend audio level display is set to on, so you can see the audio information on the LCD. If you're a single operator and running on recording and require a higher quality mic for the camera, a 3.5mm jack is available. Unless the wind is affecting your scratch audio or external microphone, wind reduction can remain off. Image stabilization will engage the sensor's gyroscopes, which can allow for smoother handheld operation. However, be aware that a slighter crop may occur in the image. When shooting on a gimbal, it's advised to turn off image stabilization, as it can sometimes get confused by the gimbal's physical movements and fight against it, which will increase the risk of warping and unnatural movement. When clear image zoom is enabled within the zoom window, this allows you to digitally zoom in via the touch panel, joystick, or D-pad. In zoom range, optical image zoom means that your zoom range can only be changed through a physical lens which is attached to the camera. Clear image zoom allows a digital zoom to occur within the camera, even when a prime lens is used. This is not meant to degrade image quality, however, it may increase the size of any noise within that image. So this is something to be aware of when filming in low light conditions or at higher ISOs. In shooting display, you can adjust the grid display and type. When set to on, the grid line will be visible and can be adjusted via the grid line type. A variety of grids are available, such as the rule of thirds, which can help with your composition. In marker display, from here you can turn on a variety of marker displays, including a center marker, the aspect marker, safety zones, and guide frames. Your shutter can also be adjusted from the exposure color page, and I'd recommend keeping auto slow shutter off. The metering window provides us with the various metering modes. The meter will be visible on your live viewing page at the bottom of the screen under M.M. When this area stipulates 0, it means the light meter thinks the exposure is correct. When a plus value occurs, the light meter thinks it's brighter than correct exposure, and when a minus value occurs, it thinks it's darker than correct exposure. Multi meters the scene by breaking up the frame into multiple areas, and then judges the exposure based on the entire scene. Center looks at the average brightness of the entire scene, but puts emphasis on the center of the frame. Standard spot provides a standard or large spot in the center of the frame, and exposure will be based only on this area. This is useful for when you wish to expose for a specific area within the scene. The location of the spot meter will depend on the spot metering point settings. Entire screen average provides an exposure based on the average brightness of the entire scene. Highlight looks at the brightness of a scene, but puts emphasis on the highlighted brighter areas. This is useful for when you're trying to avoid overexposure. A common reason to use this metering mode would be shooting a landscape scene which has a lot of clouds in the sky, or if there's a lot of snow. When face priority in multi-metering mode is turned on, the multimeter will base its exposure on the face it's selected. Finally, the spot metering point can be set as center or focus point link. When set to the focus point link, the spot meter will base its exposure on the area which is in focus. When set to center, it will expose based on the object situated in the center of the frame. Your white balance can also be adjusted on page 4, which, as previously mentioned, is also available via the quick function menu. On page 5, we have color tone, and this is where our picture profiles are located. I normally also map picture profiles to the C4 button on the camera body for quick access. For most shooting scenarios, we'd recommend shooting with the new S-CineTone profile and the CineTone color modes. However, depending on the situation and dynamic range required from the camera, S-Log 2 and 3 are also available, and this can all be captured in a 10-bit 422 codec, meaning they're much more optimized and robust for color grading in post-production. S-CineTone is a picture profile inspired by the color science found in the Sony Venice cinema cameras. CineTone brings cinematic characteristics to the image. It retains rich saturation in the shadows, but also holds good dynamic range across the highlights. The S-CineTone's color science has also been refined and reworked to produce a more pleasing skin tone when compared to pre-existing Sony picture profiles. CineTone doesn't require color correction and grading, however, this can still be done if you choose to. It's designed for the new digital age of fast-paced workflows and digital sensors. Essentially, it's an upgrade to the Cinegammas found on older Sony cameras. The native ISO for S-CineTone is 100 and 2000, which provides a good ISO range for varied shooting scenarios. A white card sits at about 83%, middle grey sits at around 40 to 45%, and skin tones will sit between 60 to 70%. If you'd prefer to use the classic Cinegamma profile, then Cinegamma 1 with the cinema color space is recommended for daytime shooting, and Cinegamma 4 with the cinema color profile is optimized for low light evening and nighttime shooting. However, for me, S-CineTone has replaced both of these as it's just a better overall color profile. S-Log2 with S-Gamut or S-Log3 with Gamut 3.Cine color spaces provide the largest dynamic range from the sensor. These produce a flat image, meaning more post-production correction is needed. The A7S III uses a 422 10-bit codec, which means these log files are more robust and able to withstand more intensive color grading. For those unsure of what a log profile is, simply put, log is a gamma curve that's designed to produce the greatest dynamic range possible for the camera's sensor. To achieve this, log profiles bring the white point and black point closer to the middle grey point, and this produces an image which lacks contrast and saturation. Greater dynamic range from the sensor allows you to retain more information in the shadows, midtones and highlights at the same time. This can allow the image to appear more cinematic and true to life once color corrected and graded. Log profiles do, however, require more color correction and exposure correction, either via technical LUTs or a manual alteration in post-production. Log profiles can also be more prone to noise, especially in the shadow regions of the image. Because of this, you should avoid underexposing log files. They should either be exposed correctly or overexposed, as this helps reduce the potential for noise and grain. Log profiles can also be more difficult to focus due to the image being so flat, so utilizing a good clear focus aid, light peaking, or a larger external monitor with focus tools such as Edge are highly recommended. Exposure values for your S-Log will be different to that of Cinegamma's and S-CineTone profiles, and they're displayed now on screen. Furthermore, if you decide to use the ETTR method, which means exposing to the right when using a log profile, these will add a further level of variance, and it will depend on how many stops of light you've overexposed by. Remember, overexposure doesn't mean killing and clipping the pixels, it just means letting more light hit the sensor. Within page 6, we can adjust our zebra levels. The preset zebra levels in the A7S III only range between 70 to 100%, which is not very useful when exposing in log, Cinegammas or S-CineTone. However, there is two custom options which can be adjusted in 1% increments between 1 to 109%. These are labeled as C1 and C2 in the zebra window. Set this to standard plus range, and then you can adjust the percentage value. I've also made zebras available via the function menu, which means I can toggle them on and off quickly, as they can become quite distracting. The A7S III has exceptional autofocus. It's quick, snappy, and sticks to the subject with minimal hunting. It's important to note, however, that the autofocus functionality will be affected by the type of lens you use and any additional adapters that are placed in front of the sensor, for example a Metabones to adapt Canon glass. Because of this, I'd recommend using a native mount lens only if autofocus is a priority. In the focus mode, you can select manual focus or autofocus continuous. Autofocus transition speed determines how quickly does the autofocus transition between subjects and objects. 4 is the middle point, 5, 6 and 7 means the transition will be faster, and 1, 2 and 3 means it will be slower. Autofocus subject sensitivity refers to whether the autofocus algorithm remains locked onto a subject or quickly switches to other areas of the frame. So lower values will mean the autofocus remains locked onto a subject, whereas higher numbers means the autofocus will be more responsive. These autofocus parameters can be utilized across a range of focus areas. Wide focuses on an area within the entire region of the screen, and a green box will appear around the area in focus. Zone selects a specific zone within the frame to focus on. Center Fix focuses on a subject within the center of the frame. Spot allows you to choose a medium or large spot and move the focus point to a desired point within the frame. And Expand Spot allows you to focus using the spot focus point, but also utilizes additional focus points as secondary priority points, and these are around the primary focus point. When face and eye priority are enabled, you can choose which eye you want the autofocus to select, whether you want a frame display to be visible. Again, I've mapped face priority to the central button on the D-pad for quick access. The Focus Assistant window lets us adjust or use our magnification points. Focus Magnifier magnifies into the frame to aid in focus. I'd also recommend having this set to a custom button on the camera body for quick access. Focus magnification time determines how long the digital magnification stays on screen before going back to the live viewing page, and the initial focus mag provides 2 magnification zoom ranges. We'd recommend keeping the first magnification as ×1. To help with focus, you can adjust your peaking display, and when on, your peaking lines will be visible. When peaking level is set to low, the peaking lines will be less apparent and pronounced, and when set to high, they will be more prominent and obvious. Choose the peaking color you'd prefer based on the color in the frame and the environment you're shooting in. For target playback, choose a card slot you're recording onto, as this will be the media card that's played back. In the setup window, ensure you're set to PAL for recording in UK frame rates. If you need to reset the camera back to its default parameters, you can do so on page 2. From here, you can also save your settings to an SD card, and then load the settings from your SD card back into the camera. This is great if you know you'll be booking out a camera on multiple occasions, and you don't want to waste time resetting your preferred parameters. Page 3 of the setup menu allows you to adjust the custom key settings for both video and playback, as well as the function buttons. You can also set different settings when in video mode as opposed to photo mode. You can also adjust what is visible on the LCD and in the viewfinder, and you can enable the shutter button to stop and start recording. You can also customize the dials on page 4, and I normally set this as AV/TV. This means the aperture will be adjusted by the front dial and the shutter will be adjusted by the back dial. Page 5 lets us adjust the LCD screen touch operation. When enabled, you're able to adjust a number of parameters directly from the panel. I normally set touch sensitivity to standard and select touch panel only. I'd recommend setting the touch position mode as absolute position and operation area as whole screen. The operation area can also be set to a particular part of the screen if required. Touch function in shooting allows you to enable touch focus and touch tracking. This can also be turned on from the live viewing page via the touch icon. So the icon is a hand which will either say off, have a dotted box next to it, or a solid box with lines beside it. The camera also has a Gamma Display Assist. The Gamma Display Assist provides a Rec. 709 overlay across your file when a log profile is used. This can make the log image easier to focus and provides a guideline for what the image may look like once color corrected in post-production. If you're shooting in log and using the overexposure method, i.e. shooting to the right, then I'd recommend keeping this turned off. If you're exposing Sony's recommended log values, then this can be turned on, and if you do so, choose the S-Log 2 or 3 to Rec. 709 Gamma Assist, depending on which log profile you're shooting in. And this would provide a correct reference for what the color corrected image may look like. To ensure the camera doesn't overheat during long periods of recording or when high frame rates are used, set the auto power off temp to high. When you're monitoring audio, you have additional sound options on page 9. Volume settings allow you to set a suitable level for your headphones, while audio monitoring lets you choose the channel you're listening to. Audio signal should also be turned on. If you're adding an external monitor to the A7S III, such as the Atomos Shinobi, you'll also want to make sure that the HDMI input settings are correct. I'd recommend keeping the HDMI resolution as auto, control for HDMI on, and I normally keep the HDMI info display off as well. If this is set to on, the camera's menu information will be displayed across the external monitor. However, a downside to this is your camera's LCD screen will become blank and you'll only be able to view your frame from the external monitor. I also always make sure record media during HDMI output is turned on. Finally, I'd recommend setting the auto pixel remapping to on. This ensures the camera automatically optimizes the image's sensor, which will reduce and prevent bright spots occurring across the recorded image. If this is set to off, then you should perform manual pixel mapping once every 3 days. Hope this helps, keep being creative, and we'll see you soon.